Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the western part of Ukraine, because we have very interesting article. According to information we have, Prince Harry makes secret visit to Ukraine. Prince Harry reportedly made a secret visit to the wounded Ukrainian armed forces at the military hospital in Lviv. You know that this is a very interesting piece of news because we continue receiving information at the same time and updates that United Kingdom is considering deploying troops to Ukraine for 5 years as a part of plans being discussed by allies, the Telegraph reports. Military leaders want the deployments to help train and rebuild the Ukraine army to prevent another Vladimir Putin invasion. The phased withdrawal scheme has been raised amid discussions between UK and France over a coalition of the willing to support any post-conflict peace deal. One of several options currently being considered would see a European-led force sent to Ukraine to initially deter Russia from breaching any settlement and give the Ukrainians some much-needed breathing space. You know that at the same time, the Ukrainians continue reporting that Russia's offensive will intensify in April-May. Deputy head of Zelensky's office. The Russians' priority will now be in the Pokrovsk direction, but activity is also possible in the Kupiansk, Liman or Zaporozhye direction, police said. You know that this is very interesting because almost at the same time we expect that the Russians are going to receive the significant number of missiles. Thousands of new short-range missiles will appear in the Russian Federation. They are being transferred by the Korea. US Commander-in-Chief in the Pacific Samuel Pararo. So we believe that as soon as the Russians get another batch of arms and munition from the Korea, the Russians will continue their offensive operation and they will intensify the activities on the ground. Furthermore, according to the BBC, Russia is planning to encircle or semi-encircle Sumy as a result of a large-scale offensive, BBC Ukraine sources in the General Staff. So now everything was puzzled and now everything we understand. The UK, the Prince of the United Kingdom came to Ukraine just with one purpose, to receive the answer to one simple question, whether it works or not to send troops on the territory of Ukraine. Because the UK authorities understand that if they send troops to the territory of Ukraine, most likely they would become the delicious target for the Russians and they will face consequences and they will see pictures that the Prince Harry saw on the territory of a military hospital in the city of Lvov. Now let's go to the line of combat contact and let's talk about the situation on the ground, and first let's continue with the Sumy direction where the Russians continue their offensive operation. According to information we have and according to different mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the direction of the settlement by the name of Belovody. So several tree lines, several fields were captured by the Russians. So the Russians, as we can see, continue offensive operation and they continue advancing in the direction of this small settlement, the next target of the armed force of the Russian Federation. Another important thing is that the Russians are about to begin their offensive operations towards the settlement by the name of Garnal. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published this video where we can see how they were bombing and attacking with FABs, with Iskander missiles, the temporary deployment points of the 80th and the 82nd Brigades of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Obviously, the picture that we can see right now is something like artillery preparation or missile preparation before the full-scale offensive operation on the ground. As you can see, several pontoon bridges were destroyed, several temporary deployment points, so everything is ready for the Russians to begin their offensive. And very likely during the next several days or hours, we're going to start receiving the first updates from this territory. The source reported that currently the Russians are trying to secure this church because this is a very important church for the Russian culture. As for the Belgorod direction, we have lots of updates as well, and according to information we have, the Russians also are preparing themselves before entering the territory of the Sumy region. And according to geolocations and according to updates, we see that most likely the Russians are planning to enter the territory of Sumy through the village of Marina and then further in the western directions towards the village of Turia. We came to this based on several videos that the Russian sources published during the previous several days. For example, example, in this video, we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine on the Ukrainian side of the border. And based on this concentration of icons, based on this concentration of events exactly from this area, we came to conclusion that most likely this is going to be the primary direction of the Russian offensive. Once again, according to BBC, according to Ukrainian sources, the Russians are planning to encircle or semi-encircle the city of Sumy. Of course, it depends on the results and whether the Russians are going to be successful or not. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the Borova and the Liman directions, where the Russians also continue their offensive operation. First, let's talk about the settlement of Nadia, where the units of the 3rd Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine are trying to hold their lines. But we see that according to geolocations and according to different posts, they are not very good at this. The Russians during the previous 24 hours improved their positions, and the Russians took under control several more strongholds, 3 lines in the fortifications of the Armored Forces of Ukraine. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 9th of April, and this is exactly the moment when the Russians were in the middle of their offensive. This is the situation by the end of the 10th of April. The Russians improved their positions significantly, as you can see, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 11th of April. The Russians secured the village of Nadia and this huge forest, and now the Russians are able to continue offensive operation further and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. So now we see that the Russians are about to synchronize their 2 waves of attacks, the northern one and the southern one, where the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. Furthermore, according to information we have, starting of the 11th of April, the Russians began offensive operation from the settlement of Makiivka in the western direction, and currently the Russians are trying to take under control the village of Grekovka, which is located to the west of Makiivka. So now we see that a week ago the Russians were using just 2 waves of attacks, the southern wave, the southern pincer and the northern pincer, and now the Russians are trying to attack from the east, and if the Russians are able to, let's say, complete all attacks successfully, they will be able to cut this territory into many pieces, and then the Russians will be able to handle with every single piece separately. As for the Liman direction, during the previous 24 hours, we received very interesting video from the settlement by the name of Novoselovka. This is very important video because probably for the first time since 2022, the Russians began bombing and attacking so deep in the Liman direction. So you know that we haven't received from this area almost anything since 2022, when the Ukrainians carried out their Kharkiv counter-offensive operation and they managed to restore control over this territory. But now we see that the front line is moving towards the river Voskol and towards these positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, which is very important. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area between the city of Toretsk, the city of Konstantinovka, and the city of Chasov Yar. As for the Chasov Yar direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their positions just a little bit on the territory of the central part of the city. The Ukrainian sources from the 24th Brigade published lots of videos how they were bombing and attacking the Russian soldiers that were trying to attack and to assault Ukrainian positions on the territory of this citadel, which is under defense of the 24th Mechanized Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine. Based on the video that was published by the Ukrainians, we have adjusted the map and we have colored additional territories. Furthermore, we still continue very interesting updates, receiving very interesting updates from the line between the city of Toretsk and Plishevka. I'll remind you that yesterday, the Russians, as a result of a breakthrough operation, managed to establish complete control over the village of Nilipovka, or to take this territory under complete control. At the same time, another group of Russian forces began offensive operations towards the mine that is located to the northwest of the city of Toretsk. And the most interesting is that today this information was confirmed also by the Institute of Study of War. They have adjusted their maps, and on their maps we can see this breakthrough as well. So the Institute of Study of War confirms that the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt. We are not saying that the Russians are able to hold their positions for a very long period of time, because this is not the primary target for the Russians. The main target for the Russians is to cut supplies and lines that go to this mine to the northwest of the city of Toretsk. As for this area, we still haven't received anything that can confirm whether the Russians managed to enter the mine and to force the Ukrainians to fall back or not. We believe that there are still very heavy clashes, and the Russians are still trying to find a key how to open these gates. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the southern Konstantinovka direction. According to information we have, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions and to take additional 3 lines under complete control. So we have colored these territories as a contested area according to pro-Ukrainian sources. So we see that the Russians continue their offensive, and we see that the Ukrainians can't stabilize the situation. As for the South Donetsk and the Pokrovsk direction, during the previous 12 hours, we have several reports. According to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians improved their positions in the village of Uspienovka. As you can see, the pro-Ukrainian sources still show the territory of Uspienovka as a contested area of the gray zone, which means that according to Ukrainian sources, there are still some pockets of resistance from the Ukrainian side. I'll remind you that the Russians reported that the village was captured several days or even weeks ago. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of Bohdanivka. This video was published by the 129th Battalion, probably of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, of the 35th Brigade, and in this video we can see how the Russians were trying to attack the Ukrainian positions with a huge number of vehicles, infantry. The Russians were trying to attack the Ukrainian positions in the fields, but this 137th Marine Battalion was trying to repel attack, and most likely they managed to deal some damage to the Russians. Anyway, according to this video, the Russians were trying to attack in this direction with the purpose to establish most likely control over these farms, over these territories, and to get as close as possible to Alexeyevka from the north. So we expect that due to the number of units and the vehicles the Russians were using, most likely during the next hours we will adjust the map in the Russian favor, and we will color this territory either in contested area according to some mappers, or maybe we're going to receive additional geolocations that will confirm Russian control over these territories. As for the village of Bohdanovka, the second day in a row, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the southeastern part. In this video, we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the positions of Ukrainians, the FPV drone operators, the machine gun positions, anti-tank positions, and different equipment that Ukrainians use for communication purposes. And this is the second day in a row when we can see these huge activities and concentration of Russian fire. So we expect that from hour to hour the Russians will begin offensive. Furthermore, the Russians continue concentration of their forces around the settlement of Shevchenka. Today we got another video how the Russians established complete control over the tree line right in front of the village. In this video we can see how the Russians brought additional forces and units to this tree line, how the Russians were trying to concentrate their forces. And when the Ukrainians discovered the Russians, they began bombing and attacking them. So we expect that in the very near future, the Russians will begin assault operations towards the village of Shevchenka, and most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area. At the same time, the Russians try to concentrate their forces along other tree lines, and using these positions, the Russians most likely will try to continue offensive operation further in the northern direction. So we expect very huge activities from this area as well in the very near future. As for the changes on the ground, that said, also during the previous night and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians carry out another massive drone attack all over the entire territory of Ukraine. The explosions took place on the territory of the city of Kharkiv. The Russians with drones were bombing and attacking the military facilities. Today we got additional details about yesterday's Russian strike with the use of Iskander in the city of Dnipro. And according to information we have, as a result of this Iskander strike, the Russians destroyed the only, let's say, plant that Ukrainians already had to use and to build the fiber optic drones. So a very huge military facility was destroyed, which was used by the Ukrainians to produce fiber optic drones, and obviously this is a very huge problem for the Ukrainians. Furthermore, the Russians attacked the city of Nikolaev with drones, and as a result of attack, also several military facilities objects were damaged and destroyed. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds you, we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.